And I'm so pleased to be joined by two amazing folks who some may need no introduction, but I'm first introducing Laura Casey, is the research editor at WSJ, WSJ Magazine, and writes about disability and other topics for the Wall Street Journal and WSJ. She held a 2022 WSJ Trust Fellowship focused on disability coverage. Laura joined WSJ in 2016. She previously worked as a reporter, researcher, and research editor primarily at Condé Nast and Hearst titles, including Self and Teen Vogue, where she covered health, food, design, entertainment, art, fashion, and technology. She has been disabled since birth and began journalism career as an investigative magazine at City Limits. Laura has graduated from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and is based in New York City. Laura Casey, thank you so much for joining us. She's also joined by, in our professional section, Allison Sabrana, who is a disability advocate based in Fort Collins, Colorado, living with ME/CFS and other chronic conditions caused by a viral infection in 2014. She is passionate about helping chronically ill people understand disability rights and navigates barriers about accessing medical care and benefits as a former care coordinator for Colorado's Medicaid program. Allison is actively involved in direct peer support and long COVID policy advocacy as a board member of Body Politic, and which is a health justice organization working to break down barriers to patient-driven whole person care through a global network of COVID-19 patients, chronic illness allies, and disability advocates. Before her illness, Allison worked in communications while performing regularly as a classical flutist in small ensembles and orchestra. Laura and Allison, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I am disabled. I do have post-viral illness, though today I'm here to talk about my reporting and what I've learned about that. I recently did a piece about accommodations in the workplace. Obviously, under the ADA, if you are disabled or if you have a perceived disability, you are entitled to reasonable accommodations. This includes in the workplace, it includes elsewhere. I'm going to focus on the workplace. I want to emphasize, number one, accommodations are not a favor or special treatment. They are your civil rights. Disclosing your disability status and asking for accommodations early in your illness or early in your employment before your condition can affect your performance can be extremely helpful and give you peace of mind. Once you start the accommodations conversation at work, you have the protection of the ADA and the process to address discrimination should it happen. I can talk about that in more detail in the breakout session later. It can be difficult to know whether to disclose at work. While it's helpful for many people and does provide legal protections, there's no guarantees that your company will ensure a seamless process or agree to the accommodations that you believe are reasonable and necessary. Also, I want to acknowledge that the more marginalized identities one has, the higher the risk of discrimination. So if you're a disabled person of color or LGBTQ, or an immigrant or any other marginalized identity, you really might have to make considerations that, your colleagues might not. But again, you are still protected by the ADA and you still do have recourse if you believe you've been discriminated against. This comes up, frequently in a recent 2022 survey by Inclusively, an online job search platform for disabled workers. Workers of color who face higher rates of long COVID or more than twice as likely than white employees, 35% versus 15%, to be unsure about their rights or their company's process, and were nearly twice as likely, 30% versus 15%, to say they were afraid of, afraid of the response they might get if they asked. So those are additional concerns that people might have. And it's up to you how you approach to ask for accommodations. Some companies have a formal HR process, but at most workplaces, you can approach the person you think would be the best to have that initial conversation with, whether that's your direct supervisor or HR or some other authority figure. You can do it orally, you can do it in writing. The initial approach is to start the conversation. The ADA is written so that the accommodations process is a back and forth conversation between you and your employer. You know, you discuss what would best serve you, what they're able to offer. And research has shown that more than half of accommodations cost nothing, and the rest typically have a cost of $500. Many employers and employees are unfamiliar with the process, may worry about the cost, not realizing that it is minimal. But the Job Accommodation Network, a service funded by the US Department of Labor, has found that accommodations costs have remained at this level since they began collecting data 19 years ago. You also do not have to disclose every disability or condition you have when you ask for accommodations, only the one or ones for which you're asking for accommodations. You can always ask for accommodations for other disabilities later. And if your disability isn't apparent, like with many energy limiting illnesses like ME and other post-viral conditions like POTS or mast cell activation syndrome, your employer can ask for documentation related to the condition you're seeking to accommodate, like a letter from a medical professional. But this can come from any number of qualified medical professionals. It could be a physician, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, community health worker, a mental health therapist, a nurse practitioner, and others. There's a wide variety. And the documentation can be as detailed or as vague as it needs to be. Naming the specific diagnosis is not always required, and can depend on your comfort level. The purpose is to document the need for accommodations, not to provide ICD codes for, an insurance reimbursement. Your employer will typically look to you to suggest the specific accommodations you'll need. And that can be kind of daunting, since the kinds of things we've been taught to think of as accommodations tend to be things like equipment, which is not always the most relevant accommodation for people with energy limiting illness. In reality, most accommodations across the board involve a policy change, like the ability to work from home, to take frequent breaks, or to work flexible hours. Luckily, there's a wealth of information on the topic. The Job Accommodation Network has an extremely thorough website called askjan.org, and they offer suggestions based on specific disabilities under its accommodations search suggestion. It is extraordinarily detailed, super, super helpful. They also offer general advice about the process throughout the site, and individual advice for either you or your employer through an 800 number, or for employers, they also offer a chat. The ADA National Network is another service that offers extensive info for both employees and employers online, as well as advice via phone and even in person at ADA regional centers. But beyond those sites and other services for disabled adults, like centers for independent living, which you can find in major metropolitan areas, every expert and patient I spoke to reiterated how helpful it is to lean on your disability community. Ask in online support groups, ask people you know in real life, ask colleagues that you're comfortable with, and on social media for what has helped other people, because crowdsourcing this is a really helpful way to do it. A lot of people with energy limiting illnesses often have imposter syndrome and don't realize that accommodations are for them too. Whether you think they're for other people because you're only familiar with more visible accommodations, or you don't think you deserve them because you've been invalidated by your family, your friends, your doctors, just recognize that that's not true. Like, you have civil rights like everyone else. And even though your accommodations might look different from, say, someone who needs a screen reader or someone who needs an ergonomic chair, they're still valid. There's still, things you can ask for. And, a lot of times, my sources had told me that they, despite knowing their rights, they still had a sense of shame or stigma and waited too long to ask for accommodations. And they had wished that they had asked sooner so that there wasn't as much stress about like feeling like they were doing a bad job at work, or as much concern about finally having to disclose and ask. It can be difficult to get over the stigma or the fear, but accommodating yourself can really be life-changing, and being creative in those accommodations is highly possible when it comes to energy limiting illness. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Those were amazing comments, and just noting that the conversation going on in the chat. Please note that those resources and those links were shared in the chat as well. And Allison, would you please join us to talk about your guidance for navigating the professional space?
Yeah, can you see my screen okay?
Yes,
awesome.
Coming through clear.
So I have been disabled by post-viral ME/CFS and related conditions like POTS and mast cell activation for 9 years now. I got sick in April 2014, and I've had an interesting and difficult journey with work, and I wanted to share some of what I learned today, and particularly the number one most important thing that if I could go back in time and teach my younger self, this is what I would tell them, which is that I have a disability now, and there are services and rights that protect me. And my disability might not look like what I previously thought disability looked like, but nonetheless, I still have a disability, and therefore I'm entitled to use those services and be protected by those civil rights protections. Embracing this and understanding this earlier would have reduced a lot of harm that I experienced trying to work jobs without requesting accommodations and being unable to do them, and trying to just job hop until I found the right job that naturally accommodated me. And that ultimately was not successful. I couldn't even sustain a part-time office job with a power assist wheelchair. And I did not know that I could request accommodations and that I could get services to help me. So that's what I want to talk about today. As you can see here in these pictures, I have a fluctuating dynamic disability, like many of us with ME/CFS and related conditions do. In these pictures here, you can see that in one, I am standing and I appear completely normal and non-disabled, and in the next, taken just minutes apart from each other, I am visibly disabled. So my experience living with ME/CFS, I have a dynamic fluctuating disability that still counts as a disability. That still means that you can access services and supports for you and be protected by disability rights. So the spoon theory is something I think a lot of people in our community talk about. If you're not familiar, essentially the idea of it is that one spoon represents sort of a unit of energy. Different activities require different amounts of energy. And in the conversation that we're having about work takes a whole lot of spoons. Like I said, in my earlier years of illness, the first 4 years, I tried to push myself to work. I also was not properly diagnosed yet. And it was really not successful. It got to the point where I was not bathing enough. I was not wearing clean clothes enough. I was not eating enough because I was prioritizing all of my spoons just to get to work. So you can see in this chart here that, if I got out of bed and got dressed and took my medication and then made and ate breakfast and then went to work, or I drove to work first, I would have been out of my energy for the day before I could even start my work shift. That's why work was unsuccessful for me in the first 4 years of illness. It's what led to my ME/CFS progressing and becoming moderate, because I was pushing myself too much, using too many spoons that I didn't have so that I could continue working, because I did not have the support that I need. Spoiler alert, 9 years in now, I am getting the services and supports that I need, and I'm able to start working part-time again. So you might be asking, what services and supports are those? They are Medicaid long-term services and supports. And you can see here, I took this straight from Medicaid.gov, the government website, that Medicaid long-term services and supports are for people with disabling conditions and chronic illnesses to help us meet our daily needs. And I feel very strongly that if someone with ME/CFS or any of our related conditions, if you're struggling with day-to-day activities, you should be able to access these services and supports. So when I say struggling with day-to-day activities, what do I mean? This is a long list of things here that I won't read off today, but it's essentially activities of daily living and instrumental activities of daily living. Particularly the instrumental activities of daily living, like going to doctor appointments, planning and preparing meals, doing housework, shopping for groceries, things like that can be so demanding for us on our energy. And this is really where I needed a lot of help, and I know a lot of people in our community would benefit from help, as well as the activities of daily living, like bathing safely. If you have POTS and you're a fall risk while you're in the shower, you know, you deserve to have help that you need to make it safe for you to do that. So what does this have to do with work? When I was trying to work the first 4 years that I had ME/CFS, I didn't have any of this kind of support other than like what maybe some friends were able to provide for me, and that just wasn't enough. This is actually a copy of how my case manager calculates how many hours of care that I need, and I need 35 hours a week of support just to get me up to like a normal level. So no wonder I was not successful in working, because I required 35 hours a week of care just to be able to be at the baseline to even think about working. That's why I was in a spoon deficit, energy deficit all the time. If you know a little bit about Medicaid, you might be asking yourself, okay, well, if I'm going to get services to make work possible for me, aren't I going to lose Medicaid once I start working and then lose access to those services that make working possible? To which my answer is there are special Medicaid programs for people with disabilities. And this is an area, again, where if I had understood sooner that I counted as having a disability, I could have gotten help sooner. Once I got on this program, first of all, a lot of my medical bills stopped, like from ER visits and stuff like that. But also then it did give me access to long-term services and supports where I pay a premium of $25 a month, and just my long-term services and supports alone, I get $3,000 a month worth of benefits from that. So really briefly, I just want to acknowledge that I know that services like the ones I've been talking about and also legal protections can be difficult to access. They're not enough. They're not equitably accessible. I know that. I promise you I know that. And I also know that there is a network of disability activists working every day towards bettering these things. When I'm talking about these programs today, I just want you to know that because we're talking about individual experiences navigating energy limiting chronic illnesses, we all have to figure out how to survive with what things are available, the civil rights protections that are available right now, while we trust other disability activists to push for change, to make it easier in the future and for the next generations of people with ME/CFS. So if you are interested in getting support like what I've talked about, I really recommend you connect with your Centers for Independent Living. If you've watched Crip Camp, you can see some of the stories behind how Centers for Independent Living started. And also look for your aging and disability resource centers. It's specifically their job to help you, counsel you on long-term services and supports and what your options are, as well to help you apply for them. So there is help available to help you access the programs that I'm talking about. And then lastly, I have to mention the How to Get On site. It's a fantastic resource. It can help explain how to access a lot of the programs I've talked about today. And it's written specifically for an audience of people with ME/CFS, written by one of our peers. And it's an extremely awesome resource. Highly recommend.